All right, so hello everyone. Welcome to our town hall. It's the second one of the day. We have 5 panelists here with us, and they will introduce themselves. And before we get the ball rolling, I want to thank Interac for providing interpreting support. Thank them very much. We have 3 questions that we will, 3 topics that we'll pose to the panelists. We might hold on the third one depending on time, because we'd also like to have a Q&A, question and answer session. If there are only a few Q&A participants, then we can ask the final topic, and then we'll close. At the end, we also have a survey, and we'll post that URL in the chat so that you can go ahead and click it, and you can evaluate this meeting, this town hall, okay? So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Laureen, last name Sims. This is my name sign with an L on the forehead. And I was born and raised in Indiana. I'm a Hoosier girl. I graduated from school, Indiana State University, and that's why they asked me to be the moderator again. So I feel honored and privileged. It's a pleasure. Now we're going to have introductions with our panelists. So we've got Kathy.
Hello, my name is Kathy Hill, and I am the board of directors for the Indiana chapter of the Black Deaf Advocates. And I graduated from there in '77, and I've been involved for over 31 years now. So here I am.
That's wonderful. And let's pass it over to Dawn. Hi there, I'm Donald. Last name is Tinsley. I graduated from the Indiana School of the Deaf back in 1969. And I was born and raised in Indiana also. I come straight from there, and now I'm in North Carolina. Thank you so much. And let's pass it to Walter. Hi there, my name is Walter Griffin. I grew up in Indiana. I went to a deaf school, and then I went to mainstream school, and I'm the former president of the NBDA. Thanks so much. And Laureen says to Richard, hi there, my name is Richard. Last name is Nell. I grew up in Indiana my whole life. I graduated from Indiana Deaf School in 1960, I'm sorry. And I love Indiana so much. I used to be the president of the NBDA for 2 years. And Laureen says, next is Candace.
Hello, this is Candace here. I was born and raised from a hearing family, and I was the only deaf person in the hearing family, but I'm from here.
Laureen says, great. So we're going to, as we continue on, we're going to remember Black Lives Matter. And someone passed away. And so many people have passed away. So we want to maintain the spirit of Black Lives Matter. And we are first going to talk about the topic of racism within the community. We have general racism, but I want you to give us an example of what racism looks like from your experience within the system, within the deaf community, which is different from general racism. So, who would like to go first? All right, Donald. Donald, you're a little dark. Is it possible for you to turn on some more lights? It might be a little more manageable that way. Oh, that's much better. Thanks, Donald. Go ahead. Hi, everyone. So my experience within the deaf community, I got a job with Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services, and I was the program director. So I applied, and I did get the job. And the deaf community was shocked. I had so many show so much racism against me. And we had different meetings, or there were different meetings regarding the fact that I was Black and that I had Black skin. And that was a traumatizing event. I'll never forget about it. But I thought positively, was optimistic, kept going, kept my participation and my leadership going. But at the beginning, it was really, really difficult. But I did succeed. And Lorraine asks, how long did you work on that job? 16 years, Dawn said, and I have since retired. Lorraine says, wow, okay, great. Other people to add. Let's go for Richard. Richard says, I graduated from the deaf school and I got a letter that accepted me into a position. But unfortunately, it was very awkward. I didn't really know how I was going to be getting to the campus. And my parents are hearing, so when I started school, I felt really behind. And I didn't feel like it was I wasn't taught from the deaf school how to transition very easily into higher education, and also as a Black individual. So I went into my new school, and a lot of people looked at me and asked why I was here. So I brought my letter to prove that I belonged here, because they asked me to prove it, these white people. And they were all shocked. And they would said, oh, where's your interpreter? Where's your interpreter? And I said, well, it's your responsibility to provide an interpreter. But I had to go and search for an interpreter myself. And I felt very behind and absolutely overwhelmed. And I didn't know where I stood in the whole entire situation. So one friend came to me and told me that it was the school's responsibility to provide interpreters. And so there was a person at the school who had a really big attitude and would always tell me all these different rules, and I didn't know what was true. I also felt like I didn't have a good relationship with this person. So I had to keep my mouth shut and follow the rules I was being given. And it was a really hard navigation. And I finally got my BA degree in 2009, but it was after 19 years, is that right, Dina, of being in school. And I never gave up. And, even though they looked at me as a dark-skinned person and I felt behind often, I never gave up. And I graduated and had success.
I just wanted to add to that. This is Kathy here. Related to what you were saying, Richard. My experience when I was working as staff with students, my first reaction when I graduated, it was in 77. And I got the similar, like you were saying, people apologized to me and, they didn't think that I could do things and weren't really focusing on me in the deaf world. It was tough. I got a lot of, I learned from the School of Hard Knocks. It was not easy. So I had to go back to my deaf world, but it was sad that I didn't have the access that I needed. It didn't fit my lifestyle. And I really felt like, in the hearing world, it didn't match for me. I have a hearing husband and hearing children, and they don't sign because I don't force them to sign. But I decided that we needed to go back to the deaf school. I needed to go back to my culture. I needed to go back to the world. The hearing world was looking down on me, and I didn't want that. I wanted to make my own way. So when I went back to the school, I was very excited about that. But I didn't see where people were as far as students in the future. Their life skills and role models, they didn't have any Black staff to look up to. And this was in 77. And then when I came back years later, it was still the same. And I said, wow, Nothing has changed. There was no achievement. There was no deaf role models there at the school. So I decided to roll up my sleeves and get involved and teach the students the real world experience, because I am a Black deaf woman and we can do it. And don't let that stop you, and don't let anyone talk down to you or let you see them differently. You have to wake up and understand how the world may see you. Don't allow that to hold you down. Don't allow yourself to be oppressed and hear all the negatives and the no, 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 and you can't do that and you can't do that. Do not allow that. I had to teach the kids that, to say, don't do that. Fight for your rights, what you can do. You can do this. You can get a job. You can be successful. So I had to show them that they can do it. If you learn it, you can achieve in the real world and you can become successful. Just because you're part of the Black deaf community, don't think that you can't do it, because you can. You can do whatever you want with your life. We can still be successful.
Laureen says, let's start with Candace and then we'll go to Richard. Okay, so Candace, thank you, Kathy, also for sharing your story about the hearing and deaf world and how different they are. It is quite a challenge. Now, Candace.
Yes, I grew up in the deaf school. I was there until 2002 when I graduated. And of course, every year they have like a state fair nearby, and it's free for students and parents to attend. So every year I always get the, tickets we need, for the mom and the dad and the kids, brothers, sisters, the family members that are needed. We have a very strong relationship with them, and we've supported them at the deaf school and the state fair. Again, my family's hearing. And so every year when I went to school, we had to register on Sundays. It was usually on Sundays. And the person said, how many in your family? And so I said, there will be 6 of us. Me, my mom, my dad, brothers. I said, there's about 6 of us. And the woman said, nope, there's a limit of 3. And I thought, huh? Is that true? I was young at that time, so I didn't really question her. I said, okay, and I accepted it. Then I watched to see other families come and see how many tickets they got. And white families, they asked for 7 or 8 tickets. And I thought there was a rule to have 3. Interesting. So of course I was upset about that. And so I spoke up about it to the president at the time. And I said, that's discrimination. That's not fair. Just because we're Black, we're limited to 3 tickets. And they decided to address the person and get us more tickets for my family. But I was like, wow. Just to see that systemic racism at play was like, whoa, from a young age, I saw it.
Lorraine says, wow, how old were you at that time?
I was probably maybe only 10 years old, about 10.
Wow, you were so young, and you had to look up and see what was happening right in front of your face.
Yeah, I remember it clearly.
Great, thank you. And Richard's saying, thank you too. So I was in school from 1986 to 1990 in deaf school. So, people are usually proud to be the first deaf involved in something. Like first deaf person to graduate in the family, for example, for me. And then when you get out into the world, things are different. You've got a lot of challenges. You don't exactly know what the next 2 years are gonna look like. So I tried to contact my friend who lived in a different state, and we would never end up getting a hold of one another. And I thought, oh man, I was wondering if there was something wrong with my skin color, or I didn't know what the problem was. So I asked my friend, finally we got a hold of one another, but they kept giving me excuses. But I remember during the deaf school, I felt so close to my peers. And then I got out into the real world and things changed. So I've had to analyze who I am as a person. And people would ask me, or I would ask people if there were any problems, and they would say, oh, no, there's no problem. But So again, the world changes, right? And changes our perspective. So I noticed going out into the real world that a lot of people who were getting jobs were white. And so I see your story, Candace, that there's a limited number of tickets, and it makes me think, wow, there really is still racism in the world, or they are trying to segregate us and keep us from the white world and keep us in the Black world, and making us socialize with ourselves only and with these negative stereotypes. So how do we provide and change their perspective? I wonder, but in any case, I have gone to friends' houses and chatted it up and seen friends that I hadn't, met for a long time, and realized that I was being left out of those of certain situations. I think it's because of my race. And so I've since left some of those friends. And then it's been rough until Black Lives Matter, which is the movement that we're in, and we are in emphasizing the fact that we need to look at each other as humans, period. Not about our skin. It's about the fact that we're equal and we're humans and we're a human family. God never taught us to divide ourselves. We need to be united as people, as humans, in his beautiful love. And that is what is completely worth it. That's my experience. Laureen says, amen. That was beautiful. I see some hands. Wow. So we're going to turn it over to Walter, and then Donald, and then Kathy. All right. So we're going to move on to the second question for Walter. All right. So in deaf school, I had, my brothers and sisters, and we had a problem with one of my teachers. And it's rare to have Black people in the class. They were mostly white. So I would raise my hand and the teacher would always pass over me, unfortunately, ignore me. And if I had something to say, their eyes would pass over me. And it was just terrible. It's the worst feeling to be passed over. And this is for, different exercises or what have you. I had questions, I had comments, and I was ignored. And so I spoke a lot with my Black deaf friends, and we spoke about how we need to stand up for our brothers and sisters. And people joined our group, and there were people who did join our group that didn't know if they wanted to stand up to the teachers and staff because they didn't want to be retaliated against or punished. And it wasn't fair. And so leaving school, coming out to the real world, I still see the same kinds of ideas, these marginalized groups or groups that separate themselves from each other. And we are definitely in need of Jesus's love with people. And the Bible definitely says that you need to be humble and show love to your neighbor. And that's it. That's what I go through life in. And I don't pay any mind to the negative looks that are thrown my way. And I just have to keep going. And what is important is that we keep going and we maintain our freedom. And then Black Lives Matter happened, the movement. And on my Facebook feed, I saw so many terrible videos, so much anger, and a lot of conversation filled with rage. And all we can really do is forgive. That's my perspective. Lorraine says, yeah, that's a great point. Donald, let's hear from you. Yeah, Walter, I have a very similar experience. So in 1955, I went into the deaf school, in elementary school, and they were all hearing, and the teacher, and all white. And they said, if there's anyone who's dumb in the way of mute, we have this person, Donald, and then they put me in a different place, like punished me. And so each year the teachers would, look at me and try and encourage me little by little until I would feel a little bit more comfortable. It's not that they would pay so much attention to me, but it was a little bit of support now and then to kind of keep me going, keep me succeeding all the way through high school. But then I look back and I remember just the discrimination and the punishment that was thrown on me when I wasn't doing anything wrong, which is as a Black deaf man, young boy at the time. And we would go out, we would have meetings with the superintendent at school and the Black Teachers Union or organization, and we would have mentors who would come to our school, and the superintendent would promise that we would be mentored and cared for, but that never happened. And we had to continue to fight and stay silent. And then the president DG of the deaf school had an NBDA board member meeting, and it ceased. And the NBDA was not impressed with what they were taught, with what was being said at the board meeting. And they brought up, the idea of Black representation. And so they decided that they need to welcome more Black people into the board and into the school. And there were Black people. Tim Amundsen came. And then finally Black Lives Matter, the movement, came to be. And retrospectively, as I look back, I think, wow, there's a lot of discrimination that I've experienced ever since, 1955, 1945 until now. And Laureen says, so Black Lives Matter has helped you really wake up and understand the discrimination that you've had to hold on to for so long in your life, and the opportunities that have been held until now. So thank you so much for giving those beautiful words. And racism is definitely entrenched in our society. So let's see if there's any last statements about this. Kathy?
As a house parent, Kathy speaking here, I was a supervisor and I had kids from kindergarten to high school. And at first time, it was a lot, the kindergartners through the high school. I had 2 bosses at the time that I worked with. I won't mention anybody's names. Before I got involved in the school, my parents taught me well. And they said, you have to fight for your rights and fight for your job. And I believe that. I believed in equality and fairness, and that deaf people should have equal access. So one time, this was out of the blue. It was completely out of the blue. It was something simple that happened. It was Halloween. And of course, I decorated the school, the blackboard and everything else. And there was Black hearing people, and there were other hearing people. And some of them were, as they say, brown nosers. And they said, oh, I can do this myself. It's okay. It's okay. I just wanted to think about the children. So for Halloween, they put on the blackboard different decorations and things like that. And then somebody came to me and said, oh, you stole my decorations to put on your blackboard. And then they reported it to my boss. And the boss called me in, and I got written up, like old school, where they'd give you a 2 weeks information, like a 2-week evaluation. And during that time, it said, oh, you stole information from someone's blackboard. I said, excuse me. I borrowed the blackboard. I asked, why didn't they just ask for me back when it was finished, instead of reporting me to say, oh, I never gave it back, you stole it? Why didn't they ask me? They never came to me first to say, oh, hey, remember I let you borrow the blackboard for decorations for Halloween? Can you give it back when you're finished? Instead of doing that, they reported me. And so my name was on a write-up for that. And I didn't even know. They didn't even address the issue with me. I said, oh, this is not fair. So when they called the other person in, and it was the first time I've ever gotten written up in many years. I never had anything, any kind of repertory demands or any kind of disciplinary actions. And when we came in and they found out, they said, oh, ha, 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 sorry. And then they just laughed about it. And they just ripped it up, but they didn't follow the proper protocol and procedure. And the second time it happened, one of the students, it wasn't my time, it wasn't an overnight shift, but something happened to the student in the bed and it wasn't my turn. And so then I came in to try to help. But I had to help for somebody else that didn't do what they were supposed to do. So it was little things that kept happening. And I said, this isn't right. And so when my boss said, oh, what did you learn from that? I said, well, we need to have more training as far as the protocol and procedures. Not just make up, oh, arbitrary rules and what we're supposed to do. That's not fair for the staff. We need to know exactly what we're supposed to do and how can we work together as a team. People need to work together as a team. So now I understand, and I woke up and I saw that that wasn't fair. We have to learn to work together. Other people weren't doing their responsibility and putting it on me, thinking, oh, don't worry, the Black girl will do it. But that's not fair. Our job is for all to do. Everyone should be helping out. We can't work like that.
Wow. Yeah, that experience saved your life, right? Pretty much. Is there anything else we need to add before we move on to the second question? Richard said, yes, I would love to add. So when I was in deaf school at that time in 1990, I graduated 2 years later in 92, and I started linguistics, a linguistics class. And that was, Laureen says, it was in 1990, I was there. And so Richard said, yes, you're right. So I thought so much about what had, and the fact that the signing style, sign language itself changed so much since I was a student. And I went back to school and saw, you know, how different the signing styles were. Especially for me, when I was growing up, I didn't have the same access to language. And my hearing teachers didn't care. I mean, I notice now that there are more Black deaf, there are more deaf teachers in schools now, which is great. But unfortunately, there's not enough Black students involved, and which is a hard thing to deal with. But I went to the KRC meeting and there was a presenter, and talked about, there was a Black student, and one of the students was very intimidated by that professor. And the question was, what is 4 times 4? And the student said 8, but really the answer was 16. And so I went ahead and went up to the student and I said, okay, 4 is a deaf student. I said 4 times 4 is essentially 4 4s. And I gave it to the student in sign language and they understood that it was 16 and they were shocked. And they said, thank you to me, and I was so inspired and really overjoyed that I could give the student this information in sign language. But I remember and I understand that, like, growing up, I didn't have that access to sign language. And so now the language itself has since improved and it's helping teach students better, deaf students. And also, I went back and thought about my situation and how much I had to suffer and the opportunities that were not given to me and how I was made to look like a fool because of the lack thereof of language access. And I noticed that there are more Black students, but there's still not enough. I want to see more Black students be successful in order to come to an equal place with other white people, white students. And we tend to look at students as, sometimes people tend to look at Black students as, oh, well, you know, it's good enough. They're getting through it. And then there's some specific elite students that might be students of color, Black students, that tend to get a lot of attention. But it's time that we have more Black students. Enough is enough. And so Laureen says, I was thinking about that boy, you know, it makes me think about the 8 and 4, 8 times 4. Maybe that person, maybe the boy thought it was 8 plus or 4 plus 4, because then that's 8. But then here's the sign for times, right? So yeah, it makes us wonder, huh? But that's a really nice approach that you took, of taking the time to give 4 4s in sign language, totaling 16. And that's great that you affected that deaf student. So we're going to move on to the next question. Maybe some of you have already answered it. It's a hardest question, I think. What is the hardest experience that you've had to go through within this racial system, but the most difficult? Are you willing to share your experience? I see your hand first, Don. Donald said, yes, I went to Chicago with my friends. Now, we were all waiting for a friend who was coming on the bus. We were going to pick them up. So there was a drugstore on the corner. We walked to and waited, and we took a look around. And all of a sudden, a whole bunch of police officers came and picked us up and threw us onto the hoods of their cars. And there were lights everywhere. People were screaming. And I was waiting for while we were doing, we were waiting for our friend to get off of the bus. And so they were writing to us, but they were white cops, right? And then they all left. And in 5 minutes, there was another round of that. And we had to write to the police officers again. And I had to give them my driver's license. And they took a look and they said, oh, okay, fine. But I mean, I'm a Black deaf man. And so they took advantage of us for sure. But I mean, I was lucky that I'm a Black deaf man, because if we were Black hearing men, I'm sure they would have beat us up. And we know that's a terrible experience, you know, that I look back on. Laureen says, yeah, that's terrifying. We'll go Walter, then Richard, then Candace. Oh, let's go to Walter first. So I used to work and with my dad, and my dad asked me to go get gas. So I went, came back, and then I got jumped. I was assaulted. I got punched in the head. There were sirens. Someone ran out and said, he's deaf. And the cop ignored the fact that I'm deaf. And they arrested me and put me in the cop car. And it wasn't in jail, but I was detained in an office. And until 8 at night, all through the night, from 8 o'clock into the morning. And my deaf female friend is a signer, and she came and asked me what happened. And I said, I don't know what's going on. And then she asked, did they tell you anything? And I said, no, there was nothing. And so she called the supervisor and asked who the officer was. And they said, oh, well, we found the right person. This is the wrong person. But I was still there. So I had to fill out paperwork that the fact that there were And then after I did that, there were 7 police that were suspended with no pay, and then they left me alone. But then one time I was pulled over, sorry, frozen. So then I was pulled over, and then I kept my license plate, my new registration, in the window of my car. And I mean, like I said, well, okay, so my friend was driving the car and I was sitting there and relaxed. And when we got pulled over, I didn't care about anything because I wasn't driving. And I told the driver to get the license and registration, and they said, "Why is it up there?" And I said, "Because I've had bad experiences in the past. Don't ask me why. I don't know. I mean, I've had experiences." So there's a lot of trauma, especially as a Black deaf man. And I remember, like getting hit in the face and, hitting the window, hitting my face and bleeding. So there's a lot of trauma. Lorraine said 7. Wow, 7. That's the worst experience that you can, the 7 police officer, that's some sincere brutality. So now let's go to Richard. Actually, we should be going to Kathy. Let's go to Kathy first.
I was on my way to my friends. I was in the process of moving at that time. Anyhow. So I didn't have my ID with me. So I was driving and I got pulled over because one of my, I think it was my seatbelt. I wasn't buckled. And so when the police asked me for the information, the other people I was with did not have their IDs, but I did have mine. I found it and then I gave it to them and they said that they were going to arrest me. And I said, "What? For what?" I said, "You have a warrant." And I was completely dumbfounded. I said, wait a minute, that can't be. That can't be. Why do I have a warrant? And he showed me something. And so the police said to me that I had to give them my personal watch, my phone, my purse. I had to give all that information to the driver. And I said, "Wait a minute, I don't understand." And they said, "Oh, you have a warrant." Apparently it was over an old driver's license. So I was confused and I didn't understand. And so they were trying to arrest me and I was trying to sign. They said, I'm deaf. If you put my hands behind my back, I can't talk. And they did it anyway. And so I couldn't even sign. And so I'm trying to speak as best as I can. And I couldn't communicate because my hands were behind my back in handcuffs. So they went into the city and they, had to do the process from the beginning to the end. And they kept asking me, and I kept saying, "I need an interpreter. I need an interpreter." I kept asking for an interpreter. "I need to make a phone call. I need to make a phone call." And they kept telling me 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, and denying my needs. And I was so scared. I was scared to death. I was so afraid. I didn't know what was going to happen or what was going on. I didn't have any access to communication. There was no interpreter provided. They didn't allow me to make a phone call. I had my phone in my bag, but they didn't allow me to have it. And then they had the coins and I didn't have any money. I didn't have my purse. I couldn't make a phone call. I couldn't do anything. And I kept trying. And it was a failure every time I tried. And I said, "What can I do? What can I do?" Like I just had to be patient. And the whole ordeal lasted for about 5 days. 5 days? 5 days. I had no access, no interpreter, no communication. They did not allow me to call home. The first day, I was very, very sick. I mean, my blood pressure was through the roof and I was sweating and I did not feel good. I was so ill and I needed to go to the hospital. But they ignored me and they just kept me in the cell. sometimes you're in a roommate, but I was by myself. But anyway, I kept saying that I needed to make a phone call. I needed to do something. I had no one to contact, no way to contact anyone. And every time I tried to ask to get some assistance for someone to call for me or someone to get some help, they ignored me. So finally, somebody came and they did help me and they allowed me to call home. It was a woman. It was a woman. Yes. Oh, okay. Yes. Finally, a woman came, a woman officer, and she helped me. And I explained to her that I'm deaf and I was worried and I had no communication. And they did have a TTY there. But I was like, how can I even use this relay system? They didn't even know how to use the system. It was an old system. I had to do like 7-Eleven at that time. Oh yeah, a long time ago. I had to dial 7-Eleven to the operator and then get through to relay to talk to my family. And so that's finally how I got through to the relay, by dialing 7-Eleven. And I got a call to my friend, who my friend had to communicate. And oh, it was such an ordeal to get through, to explain where I was at and everything else, because my friends didn't know where I was, because I was in the car with them and I was just taken. And so then I didn't know what city I was at or anything. I had no idea. My parents had no idea where I was. People were trying to find me. My roommate had no idea where I was. No one had a clue of where I was. Finally, when I got through to somebody, they asked me, "Are you okay? What do you need?" But it was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Yes, it was about 5 days. And then I was finally saw someone in court. I finally got to see my judge in court, finally, after 5 days, without an interpreter, without access, without communication, without so much as a phone call all day and night. And the judge, of course, let me go home with just a small little fee, a slap on the wrist. But I felt so dehumanized after that, having spent 5 days in jail without any access, without any interpreter. It felt horrible. So I said, what do I do? And people are like, oh, you should do this, you should do the fight. But I was just so exhausted. I didn't want to give up. And I wanted to contact the ADA and tell what I needed to say and tell my story, but I needed to go through the steps. And I didn't even know what the steps were at that time. It was so overwhelming. So the jails really need to do better for the deaf Black community, seriously. I'm sure that the white deaf people don't get treated the same and don't get ignored. And the way that I was treated was not right.
Maureen says, wow. I mean, that's really something, but I don't want to cut you off, but it's 7:43 and we still have a little bit of time. We're only on our second question. So we're going to hold the third one and jump to the Q&A. So I know that Candace and Richard have not said anything yet. And Richard said I would like to say something just quickly. So at that time, I worked for Hewlett Packard. At this time, I was really motivated to show how able I was to do my work, my job. And there were some people who would skip work. And I would show up, there was a Chinese man actually who would watch me and would say, oh, I don't know if you can do this job. And I would say, no, of course I can. And the Chinese man would say, I don't know. I really don't think you can do it. And he would see me do everything I said I could do. And he finally warmed up and I taught him that I could, that I was able. And there are other coworker situations where, you can have like a vengeance, retaliation sort of situation. So there was a one top dollar laptop equipment that I was responsible for. And so I left it at work and I was getting ready to leave. And then I realized that I left it in a place where I shouldn't have hanging. And so I had to go get it and then it was gone. And so then I told people that I told someone that I needed their help. And so then we went to talk to the boss and explain everything. And the boss said, you're fired. And I wrote down everything, the fact that I had just put it where it was. And the boss said, you are fired, that's it. And I was just so upset, really, really angry. And someone else said to me that like, hey, no, he's deaf and he's black and, you know, trying to defend me. And all of these white people were the ones who were behind me. And I was the first black person. All these people looked up to me as a team lead. And the boss still said, you're fired. And so I felt really overwhelmed and taken advantage of. And I had to go home and I asked my friends. Oh, I told my friends, other people in my life, this story, and they said, no, you have rights regarding this case. And so, and then I had evidence that I showed, and they offered me $196 just for all of the back pay that I was really owed from having been fired unjustly. And so then I decided to close the case and went to a new lawyer, and he took care of things. They took care of things. We sat down and talked, and then the lawyer asked me, how much are you looking for? And the lawyer said 30, 40,000. And I said, that's fine. But my point is that employer looked down on me as a black deaf man and thought I was dumb. And it was really hard to get through that. I kind of begrudged that. And those people looked at me as a dumb person in this, a deaf, dumb person in this hearing world. So there's just so much racism against Black people. And I mean, at the same time, they did let me become a team lead, but when I made one mistake, I was fired, and they don't want to see a Black deaf person lead. That's really the answer. So, all right, so Lorraine says, Candace is the last one and I want her to be able to say something, but let's talk about it and then we'll move on to the Q&A. All right, yes, so we're gonna go ahead and talk about your experience, Candace.
Okay. So like I said, I have a bicultural hearing family, and then I went to the deaf school. And the deaf school was the one that taught me about Black history. And I was like, oh, this is fabulous. I was so motivated and interested to learn. And I went home and I told my family, and they were like, oh, no, no. And I was confused, because do I believe what the school taught me, or do I believe what my mother is saying? So there was a conflict. So I continued to learn from the school, and I continued to tell my mom, so maybe my mom would learn more history because she didn't know at that time. So then when I graduated and I learned more and more and more about the deaf world and the Black world and Black history, I was like, whoa, there's so much of Black history that we need to cherish as Black people.
Lorraine says, absolutely, I completely agree. So I don't want to jump to the third question yet. I think we should let Tim pop his video up and we'll talk about some questions from the audience. So Tim, and actually panelists, let's make our answers as succinct as possible. I know that there are some questions from the audience. We've only got 10 minutes left, so not everyone has to answer. Let's just go ahead and have one person answer one question, and then we'll move on to the next question. One person can answer that. Does that make sense? So I just want to be able to approach as many answers to questions as possible. All right. Tim says, thank you, Lorraine. So the first question, what kind of policy system within the system would you like to see in your lifetime?
What kind of changes in the policy?
Yes, thank you. What kind of policy changes within the system would we like to see within your lifetime? So Lorraine has said.
And Donald's asking, are you related to work or school or in general? Because that's a pretty broad topic.
You can go ahead and raise your hand first, and then we'll keep it real short. All right, thanks, Kathy.
Okay. I think the biggest thing is education, education, education. We need to have more education, workshops, understanding, philosophy. We need to understand how to better help the Black deaf community, how we can all benefit from that.
All right, Kanan, does anyone have anything to answer? Richard, you have something to say? Yes, I would say that the deaf schools need to add very clear case managers for students, because there are students who are very far behind, and we need to have a case manager to be able to be present to listen to the students. I mean, oftentimes these students they have hearing parents, they don't have a lot of support. So if they had a case manager, they would be able to be provided more opportunities and have more engagement and be able to express themselves more clearly. And that's what a case manager would do for a deaf students. It would elevate them and make their lives better. And Laureen says, thank you so much. The question has already since gone. So Donald says, I agree with you. I think mentors are absolutely important, like teachers as mentors to students, making students feel comfortable and supported. That's what I'd like to say. Lorraine said, thank you. I know there's so much more we can add, but I know that we have more questions, Tim. So let's see what we've got. And Dina, you can take Tim. How about that?
Sure. The second question is, what are you or the Black Lives Matter prioritizing? What do you want to see as far as immediate change? What is priority on your list for immediate change? And also, a follow-up to that, how can we be allies? How can people support this? Oh, that's 3 in 1. But the first one is the priority, of course, what needs to be changed. And then that's the second one. And then follow up is how can the allies be involved?
Yes. So let's hear from someone who hasn't spoken in a while. Walter. Walter says, well, I think the priority should be love. You know, no matter what, the key for the priority is love. Your attitude changing, that will definitely develop if you show love. You know, all these different changes will create love. We can't stay segregated. And Laureen says, love is very powerful. Next question, Tim. Thank you. Tim, we are waiting on you. What's the next question? Or are we done with this? Is Tim done? Should we move on to the last question? Okay, let's move on to the third question. Unless you guys have anything more to add regarding the second question. Oh, I see you now, Tim. So, and actually Kathy has something to add, so she'll go for it.
When I said, obviously this town hall meeting, I would like to continue town hall meetings. I would like to have more workshops, have more partnerships with other organizations.
NAACP.
Have NAACP and other state and community partnerships involved. I would like to invite them to our workshops. So I would like to partner with them as allies.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's wonderful. And I hope that, Candace, do you have anything you'd like to add? We're just gonna keep on going. So I know, I'm sorry, I keep being like, Tim, calm.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Just one more. Yeah, one more question, really quick, it's important. What do you think that the Indiana chapter for Black Deaf Advocates or other deaf organizations in Indiana, what do you think that we need to do more of as far as providing sensitivity and diversity training for employment, school, and government? How can we be involved?
All right, is that a clear question? Everyone understands that, right? So let's go to Candace, because we should have you answer, right? Go for it.
Oh, yes, definitely. I think we should be more involved. Definitely. We all agree. Yes, we want to be more involved.
And Tim, let's ask another question. Oh, you're back.
Oh, more questions. Okay. Ah.
So the third question is, do you think, oh, I'm sorry.
Do you think we should more be involved? And we said yes. But do you want me to repeat the question again? Yeah, you can repeat the question. Maybe we misunderstood what you meant. Do you think that we should be more involved? The ICDBA and the Indiana chapter, we should do more to provide sensitivity and diversity training for employment agencies, for school, and for government. Do you guys think that we should do more? Do we need to provide more of that? And it was 100% all around yes. Oh, okay. That was the answer. Let me see if I have one more question here. Well, we have 4 minutes left. We only have 4 minutes left. Okay, let me see if I can find one more question. Do you think the Indiana chapter for the Deaf Black advocates should do more to provide for the rights of deaf people? Is that similar? It kind of, yeah, it kind of overlaps. It piggybacks on the other one. I guess that's it then. That's all we have. Yeah, that's all we have for now. Because that was kind of a piggyback to the other question that we already mentioned. So we can post the survey on Facebook chat. So we'll post the survey and we'll get some more ideas from there. And we'll have some questions for our next town hall meeting, hopefully. And then we'll get back to you.
All right.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Well, we only have a few minutes left. Okay, we're all set for now.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to our third and final question. It's what do you need from the deaf community to approach racism? How do we start to approach racism within the deaf community? And can you say it in 4 minutes, 3 minutes?
Okay, to begin the conversation, I think it starts in school. As Kathy mentioned, education. We need to start with school. It needs to start at a young age and not later, from preschool on up. Because now looking back, when I was in elementary school, I saw a lot of white faces. And it was only one Black person that I saw that was really a comfort for me to see that person. And do you know who that was? That was you, Lorraine. That was you. Oh my goodness. This is in 1990s? You were the supervisor for the elementary school at that time for that year that I was there. And I kept getting in trouble because I was very rebellious. And I was stubborn, and I just didn't want to listen. I didn't care, and I had a kind of nonchalant attitude. So they sent me to you. They sent me to your office. And I remember seeing, whoa, there's a Black woman. I was shocked. A deaf Black woman. And that really spoke to me as a young Black deaf woman myself. And we need that more in our residential schools so the students can see that. A person of power position, it really changed me.
Wow, I'm starting to feel old. I gotta retire, I guess. No, just kidding. So we have Richard and Walter and Kathy, and maybe last one is Donald. We gotta wrap it up. We got a minute left, so here we go. So Richard says, absolutely, I agree with your comment, Candace. In the deaf school, the teachers and staff, I've already seen that they have no experience with Black students. And so I think that that the Indiana chapter should definitely add a group that we could call, I don't know, we could give teachers and staff practical approaches to how they deal with Black students. And different ways of providing feedback and give them the ability to keep certain things in mind so that they can really help progress Black students. And my favorite word is just requiring practice every day. And so we need to make sure, that's my suggestion. All right, thank you so much. All right, so now it's 8 o'clock. We can only have like 2 minutes, like literally like a little bit of time. So Kathy, here we go.
Okay, I'll keep this brief. Oh, I forgot what I was gonna say. Okay, now I remember. So it's good to start in the schools, like you were saying. And then also we, as our chapter, we need to support. And whatever the community may need, we need to be available. When they call us, to contact us from the president on down, to have workshops, we need to focus on that. And we need also have the Black deaf parents, because they need it to teach the children, because they don't know what's going on, like you said in the children with Candace's story. Sometimes the parents are disconnected, so we need to educate the parents in our partnership. So this is a lifelong effort. No child left behind. Okay, that's the goal. Let's focus on that. Thank you.
That's beautiful. All right, Walter, let's go. So regarding deaf school, they definitely need to recruit teachers who understand Black culture. And if they don't have teachers that can't understand Black culture, then they're not going to be able to be helpful at events and be supportive. So if teachers can learn more about Black culture, then they can definitely understand how to better support the children who are Black in school. And the school will definitely, I mean, we don't know if it will grow, but all I can do is pray for the deaf schools will learn to support their students. Thank you so much, Lorraine says. And Don says, I know that it's very important to learn Black history in school. That's a humongous point for me. Lorraine says, well, thank you to the wonderful panelists. You were so wonderful. You know, thank you, Candace and Richard and Walter and Don and Kathy. You know, we have so many great experiences shared by Black, deaf men, women, that really show how wrong it is to have racism, systemic racism. So I hope that the audience who's been watching has learned and is going to make some changes in their lives from here on out. And all we can do is hope. So thank you all. And until the next. And Tim, thanks so much. Thank you for your help. And Tim has something else to say. Dina?
Last, I just wanted to say, please do not forget to fill out that survey. Please, please, please. It's on Facebook chat. Go on Facebook chat. Yes, you guys can do it as well. Fill out the survey and let us know what you think. And then if they have any more questions, we can use it on our next town hall meeting, which will be in July. And that'll be our last one. Looking forward to it. Until next time.